Hey there, welcome to episode 100 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 5:20 p.m. Pacific time here in the Greater Vegas area on Thursday, October 23, 2025. We normally publish on Thursdays, so we might still make it. Today's title and topic, public safety. Somewhat controversial in this modern era, so hopefully we can get through it. And do remember, this is the beginning of conversation, debate, argument, and so on, not a single end-all and be-all, if you like. If you're not familiar with the FFS Talk audio program, the idea is to engage in conversation, discussion, debate, argument, etc., about various issues, topics, concerns. There are soon to be 100 different episodes to that, in that direction, to that point, I suppose you could say. So the idea being eventually, if there are ever guests for this audio program, we have an established starting point, if that's interesting to someone. Any of the 100 episodes and the various titles, really topics that are in those soon to be 100. Today, there is an episode 0, but the 100 episodes that will be in the can after we finish recording today. Each of those is a topic that could be the start of a conversation or an argument or debate, etc., like I said. And so we're basically laying the groundwork, a lot of groundwork. Will we ever have guests? I think if we fit this into the overall strategy, which I have talked about in the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, about my own startup efforts in the media space, this might be interesting in that context. So if you're not familiar with what FFS means, first of all, the idea is to discuss what works and what does not, and what we might do about it around the various topics, so that some might argue that the things that seem to work actually do not, or the things that seem not to work actually do, and so on and so on. There's always a different way to see things, and so it is important to discuss them. A meeting of the minds, if you like. FFS itself is an abbreviation for a common Irish expression. I'm sure it's to be found elsewhere as well. I myself heard it many times in my various visits to Dublin in Ireland. If you're not familiar with what that expression is, I suggest you hang out with more Irish people. So on that note, hopefully wherever you found this audio program, in various new and additional places, hopefully more into the future, but you never know. Hopefully wherever you did find it, though, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes. In this case, one sentence, which I will read, and then the links for today's episode. And for today, there are 2 program links, the usual. Every episode has them, and then 4 episode links. So we'll run through those real quickly, and then we'll get through the show and into the weekend eventually. It is Thursday after all, or whatever day it is when you're listening to this. So on that note, the show notes, in fact, summary of today's episode, one political hot potato that has come up many, many times in recent days. Defund the Police is classic misdirection, but a hard look at public safety is long past due. And once again, today is not where we solve problems. It's one where we begin to discuss and ponder, come up with ideas, what we might do. The links for today's episode, the usual homepage for FFS Talk, ffstalk.com, no punctuation, .com. FFSTALK, no spaces or other interruptions, and then a period, COM. That's always a work in progress. They're coming along. I have various websites for the various programs that you may or may not be aware of. If you're not, you can always check, or even if you are, you can check out the profile page linking everything, which is still at buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. You're under no obligation to spend any money there. But there are links to all of my audio programs in various places where you might find them. There could probably be a few more links, in fact, specifically, so you don't need to visit the Spotify creator profile page. We got the YouTube channel, FFS Talk, so @ FFS Talk. We have Apple Podcasts. We have Amazon Podcasts. We have Spotify, of course. There's an RSS feed. There's the homepage. We'll see about getting in other. I'm sure we're in other places, anywhere that picks up and shares feeds. We're probably in Podcast Index, maybe. Probably elsewhere. The joy, wherever you find your podcasts, is how that works. Also on that page, you'll find affiliate links for things that I actually use, like my favorite coffee beans, available on Amazon, probably at twice the price now. And some other things, again, that I actually use. So you have links to all my media programming. You have links to the various projects I'm working on. You have some biographical information. And don't forget the actual Buy Me an Update audio program published on Mondays, also linked from that page. Initially available exclusively on buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts, but now available as well in all of the usual places. Links to all of this on the profile page, linking everything. For today's episode, we'll start with perhaps the most controversial, if you take the time to read it. It's a Goodreads link. I didn't find a book specific or author specific link. Those are probably the best to link to a particular book. There, obviously I could link to the Amazon page. I could link to an Audible page. I could link to any number of places, but so I went with Goodreads, which I think is still an Amazon company anyway. If there's a better link, go for it. The Propaganda book, propaganda as in propaganda from police organizations. A really interesting read if one approaches it from a place where we are seeing or understanding that there is, I'll use the word agenda. There is an agenda in the book. It is trying to prove a point. The thing with a book, and this is true of documentaries and so on, there is a point of view. And so the book doesn't cover, for example, a lot of scenarios that do not support the thesis of the book, of the author. So keep that in mind. But it was an interesting read. Often the good news doesn't make the news. So it's kind of tricky to focus only on negative, but there are negatives. So that is an important thing to realize on both sides. Sunnyvale DPS, Sunnyvale, California, their Department of Public Safety, a link to their website, which describes the public safety department there. Unique in the United States as a cross-trained, unified Department of Public Safety. Every police officer is also a firefighter and a paramedic or EMT. Every EMT is a firefighter and a police officer as well, and so on. I lived in Sunnyvale for many years. I had some interactions with DPS through volunteering with the SNAP program, Sunnyvale Neighbors Actively Prepared, and Leadership Sunnyvale, where we had a member of DPS in our class. That would be true for every time there was a class. They sponsored one DPS member who was not the chief, but somewhere higher up in the management hierarchy of DPS, and visits to the fire stations for different events, including SNAP volunteer training, waffle breakfasts with firefighters. The police station was actually walking distance from where I lived. I think I was probably there once or twice, maybe. I don't remember why exactly. Nothing too exciting. So Sunnyvale DPS link for some information about that. It's an interesting way of doing things that is pretty unique. There was at some point one other place in the United States, nowhere near the population of Sunnyvale, so nowhere near the size. I don't know what the population is today. When I was living in Sunnyvale, it was between 120 and 130,000. And I want to say there were about 220 DPS officers, fire, police, and EMT combined. Interesting. Defund the Police on Wikipedia. The Wikipedia article is fairly information rich, but also not too agenda packed. Whereas, for example, the Defund the Police website, I'm sure there's several similar sites. This one claims to be somewhat authoritative, but the defundthepolice.org website seems to be heavily leaning towards, and most slantedly towards hard defunding of the police, removing police forces and replacing with something else, whereas the Wikipedia page looks more at augmentation, re-examining structure and approach. But it is a Wikipedia page, so it is only the place to begin explorations in this area, not the place to end it. So this is only the smallest smattering of information one might examine on this topic, but we are only at the beginning. So first, let's get started. My understanding of Defund the Police, my own, some context from my perspective. Often, especially around election time, there will be a popular catchphrase thrown around by all parties involved, something with implied meaning that differs between those parties. It could be defund the police. It could be, well, a notion might gain more than one label, but perhaps they compete for popularity and one might win out. So one example that comes to mind is the estate tax and the inheritance tax. This is a pair of taxes. They're not the same thing. They're taxes on assets transferred after death and so on. There's a lot more to it than that. Collectively labeled death tax for the purposes of campaigning to tug at the heartstrings or to create a mental image or to generally propagandize during the campaign cycle. Nobody wants a death tax. That's horrible. Nobody wants death panels. Nobody wants, what does defunding the police actually mean? It can mean whatever you want with the right context and audience. The slogan or call to action to defund the police has what I would say a spectrum of meaning or intent, from reallocation of some funds with police services from police services to alternative services such as mental health counselors, all the way to actually abolishing police services in favor of alternatives, whatever those might be. I'm sure there are a variety of ways to approach that. As usual, the most extreme end of a spectrum is most useful to sway voter opinion as part of campaign rhetoric. So we get both ends, maybe more takes on the notion. Very rarely a normal discussion somewhere in the middle or somewhere that's considering all possibilities. So usually very politically charged and a political talking point and so on. So not always productive, but certainly exciting. Not always in a good way. As a political cudgel, we may see actual funding reduction for policing, which has been the case in various places around the country recently, coupled with introduction of ICE and National Guard and even active duty military into cities to allegedly supplement local law enforcement resources, which may not be available or maybe, put these in air quotes, underperforming. This is always a subject of debate recently, so it may not actually be the case depending on which opinion we listen to, which data we choose to believe. This only complicates matters, so let us take a look at what we all might imagine when we think of our local police and where we might place the police in a portfolio of sorts of public safety services in our local communities, our surrounding areas, city, county, etc. Keep in mind, and as usual, these are the seeds of future discussion here on the FFS Talk audio program, and debate, opinions, and views may and likely do differ. So yeah, this is a starting point. I'm not here to advocate for anything in particular. We all have some ideas and viewpoints and so on. So let's start off with what works from that perspective I just outlined. I've had a positive experience or two with police in different cities in California and Nevada, even in other countries, from traffic stops to calls to dispatch to visiting a nearby station to file a report here in Vegas. As is often, actually, it wasn't nearby me, it was nearby the incident, so it was downtown. As is often said, it is probably not realistic to judge a police force by the worst case scenarios. There are normal humans employed as police officers. I would suggest that one factor here is whether police are a part of a given locality, either living in or engaging with particular communities. So the more often you can interact with public safety folks when it's not an emergency, there's not an incident in progress. And here in Vegas, actually, to their credit, they do have the coffee with cops and coffee, so it's whatever that's called. So an opportunity to hang out at a coffee shop with some police officers in a conversational format, not you're not being pulled over or cited for anything. So interesting, possibly valuable, possibly not scalable. You can only meet with maybe a dozen people. The Clark County has 2.3 million people. And from what I've seen in my limited travels around that style of meetup here, the turnout is not substantial. So it's a small, tiny fraction of community engagement. I have not been involved with this, but here in Vegas, there are more than 0 barricade situations, substantial roadway incidents, which can block traffic for extended periods, and occasional incidents of individual violence on the Strip and elsewhere. It is important to have a responsive, properly equipped cadre of people trained, skilled, and motivated to deal with these sorts of scenarios. These sorts of things may happen where you are also, and do keep in mind, Vegas does have a lot of visitors, so a lot of people who are not local, something around 40 million people every year. Some of those may be duplicates, but that's a lot of volume of people who are not always familiar with the laws or who may have their own agenda. There is a misperception, perhaps, that the Strip is a high crime area, but because there are police either parked in some places, kind of a police presence, as they say, there is a new Strip. What do they call it? There's essentially a little. What do they call it? I'm totally spacing on the name, but there's a small office. There's this a station on the Strip, and I walked by it. I don't think it was open yet, but I think it is now open and operating. So you can actually visit a command. It's I guess a command center, but it's a small scale command center. So there's actual police presence and administrative presence right where it is, quote, needed. In some places, there are special forces of sorts, the transit police in some places that have, especially subways. Here we have police. They're not formal police. They're transit security, but they will occasionally board and ride on buses here in the Vegas area. There is a Capitol Police in Washington, D.C. Their jurisdiction is the Capitol and the surrounding properties. And others that are in place to tackle particular scenarios. They make the news often, especially when things do not go well. This is probably more often the case when police and fire join forces for rescue or another catastrophe management and whatnot. In a first response role, and I will remind anyone who has heard or mention it for those who have not, I have experience as a CERT volunteer. That's the Community Emergency Response Team. It's normal people volunteering to be available in case of emergency, which is by no means magical, but which does inform some awareness just what the first response interaction is in a crisis situation. As they always say, you don't want to be where the first response teams go first, because that means you have it the worst. And that is an unintentional rhyme. What does not work? And this is only a partial list. Almost certainly there are many, many anecdotes and actual statistics that we could look at in a deeper dive, but let's keep it simple for today. As far as the United States, we are a country and government, or federation of governments, more correctly, formed with built-in racial division. And while the magnitude may vary by location, this is still an issue today, to say the least. And we've been around for 250 years. It was an issue prior to the formation of the country, so not going to be solved overnight, sadly, even though there have been many nights where it should have been. A student of history will know that the many, many mile markers along the path of this country, the easiest and most obvious example as we record this is ICE activity in the news every day now, which is by design aligned along racial lines. It's designed to evoke fear and compliance. These are not great things. It's not a great way to do things, my opinion. And this is not new, although there is a lot of light shining on ICE activities with pocket media capture devices and online sharing the norm today. If you do flip through a history book or two, these sorts of things have actually been happening the whole time to different degrees in different places. At best, a profound disappointment. but so much worse than that. One element of the Defund the Police movement, if that's a word to use here, revolves around police performing roles as counselors, mental health professionals, social workers, and other roles that are not focused on law enforcement, but rather individual and community health. One personal example here in Vegas, if one calls the non-emergency short number 311 for a wellness check of someone, LVMPD, that's the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, will visit the indicated address to check on the health and well-being of a person or persons per the outreach. This moves police staff, that is police officers, off the law enforcement tasks they're probably supposed to be doing and sends 2 armed officers to someone's home, which may or may not go well. In my case, it was fine. I called about someone who had become unresponsive and who lives literally on the other side of town. So I said, can someone just stop by and see if he's answers the door even? So that went well, but you never know. And in fact, I will say the person on whom I'm called, so to speak, would have been much better off if it wasn't police officers knocking on the door, but someone who could actually continue a conversation about the state of affairs at the time. My opinion. The propaganda book that I linked in today's episode is arguably leaning heavily into supporting evidence to make the point of the book, or the points, regarding how law enforcement participates in shaping public opinion in various ways, sometimes proactively and not necessarily fair and balanced, if you to coin a phrase, along with action and behavior that may be unsavory if disclosed, which is part of the divide between law enforcement and regular people like you and me. I should point out here at this time that I have no affiliations with law enforcement, but I have had experiences with law enforcement individuals, especially, at least one in my family extended family, who was not a good person. And so I don't believe this person had participated in any sort of physical violence, although who knows, can't be sure. But he was definitely a corrupt individual. So we can leave that there for the moment. With the us-them relationship, encouraged to have that divide, it is nearly impossible to make police and community about working together where the divide rules. So keeping it us-them may have an agenda attached to that as well. Just how significant this divide is may well vary per neighborhood block, and your mileage may vary as well. Neighborhoods, community, and how the nature of the interaction between the particular area or region, literally down to the block. It's interesting to examine. It's probably not so fun to be embroiled in those types of scenarios where so much difference can take place, sometimes not even communicated well. So I mentioned Sunnyvale with the link to their DPS resources online. I included the link to the Sunnyvale DPS because of their unique triple trained forces of professional officers. This itself is unique. I think I repeated myself there. The only city of size, and in fact, and I think at some point I looked up the other city that was allegedly implementing a triple trained DPS infrastructure. And I don't know that they still were, or it's such a tiny town that it was, that's basically how Sunnyvale got started. It was the result of shorthanded volunteer forces in the very early days when the area was still developing and the city of Sunnyvale was founded, or just before. Since every member of Sunnyvale DPS is a police officer, a firefighter, and an EMT, emergency medical technician, trained in basic life saving. If you're on an ambulance, you are probably more advanced life saving. So you're using paddles. You're not just doing CPR. You're doing paddles for defibrillation. You might have EKG monitors. You may have a lot more intravenous medications that can be dispensed and injected, I suppose. So advanced life-saving it has a lot more equipment involved and specific training, but every DPS officer is trained in basic life-saving services, including CPR, including the Heimlich maneuver, but also including stopping blood loss, basic triage, immobilizing body parts in case of injury, and assessing the injury is the triage. So fairly interesting, actually. It's a specific focus. Probably a lot of police and definitely all firefighters have this training, but these are specific additional trainings in basic life saving services. Totally interesting. Where am I? Okay, train in basic. Since every police cruiser includes basic fire equipment on board, this is true because police are often the first to arrive at the scene of a fire or emergency. So they are equipped to begin participating not as a police officer, but as a member of the firefighting force that will arrive probably soon after. Since every fire truck, engine, and ladder includes firearm lockboxes and a ticket book. Hey, we noticed you didn't stop while we were coming through that intersection. We're going to have to write you a ticket. But you're the firefighters. So they have that at least, and whatever else involved with carrying on the role of police officers, even if they're in a big red truck or vehicle. Every member of the force can engage just about any incident, just about. They have a little joke that they all use to answer this question. So I was the one to ask it. I didn't know about this until I asked, the typical question you would say. And so any DPS officer in the Sunnyvale DPS organization can be any of the roles. Probably depends on where the need is. If there's if they're shorthanded in the firefighting area, they might be a firefighter for months or a year or two or whatever the case is. So you can move around within the organization, and they're triple trained, as I said, so you can do what's needed. What's the difference, one might ask, and I did. What's the difference between being a police and firefighter in Sunnyvale DPS? And of course, their pat answer: when you're a firefighter, people wave at you with all 5 fingers. Sunnyvale is a big, small city, or maybe a small, big city, which over time became more and more expensive a place to live. Silicon Valley, gotta love it. That's why I don't appreciate we're going to be the next Silicon Valley. Anyway, DPS made a concerted effort, whether members of the force were living within the city or near. So more and more often they were not living near the city. If they were fortunate, put that in air quotes, fortunate enough to have a home from the before times, before Silicon Valley led to the massive gentrification of the Bay Area. Maybe they lived within the city itself, or they might live nearby. A concerted effort to engage communities and schools with individual offers focused specifically on outreach. So you might encounter a police officer, but it wouldn't be in an incident scenario. It would be in a community engagement. And this was fairly common. It was a popular notion, and there were police officers assigned to different schools, different neighborhoods, and so on. And you could actually get to know these people. Add to this various events around connecting fire stations to their adjacent communities, often waffle related, which I think I mentioned. Often waffle related. Fire stations typically have a whole kitchen, and somebody there usually likes to cook, so they converted that into breakfast gathering opportunities at the station, so you could actually meet your firefighters. And as I don't know if I've mentioned this in this audio program, but I was the recipient of firefighting services, for better or worse. One early morning in April of 2013, I guess it spread to three homes, essentially. Fire at 2 in the morning, I think it was 2 or 3 in the morning. The firefighter showed up. I knew exactly how it was all going to work because of my SNAP training and interactions at that level, not to mention the fact that I had hung out with some firefighters and I knew where the nearest fire station was and so on. So that base familiarity was good to have when when there's a fire. And then when you're participating in a community outreach event at a fire station, you're automatically including police and EMT because everybody did all of the jobs. Oh, and the city has their own version of CERT, which I referred to. SNAP, Sunnyvale Neighbors Actively Prepared. So you're a civilian first response volunteer group. You get training in what to do in case of and why, and how the system integrates and why the triple training makes a difference, and so on. A civilian first response volunteer program, which I was part of, not only there, but also here in Vegas in CERT. It's designed to enable a network of community members aware of what to do and how to do it in case of an emergency that prevents or prevented, back when I was living in Sunnyvale, first response from arriving for maybe days. And as they would always say, you don't want to be where they show up first. That means you're in the worst case. There was always a concern expressed often by casual observers. Every officer on duty and maybe a few more would show up for any incident. So in other words, I will say, for example, I was on Murphy Avenue in downtown Sunnyvale, which I lived a 5-minute walk from there. So I would hang around there frequently. There was a person with a sword, under a duster. That's always suspicious, right? But it turns out you can walk around with a sword as long as you're not waving it at people, but certainly not using it on anyone. But there are no possession laws that were applicable to make this a crime of some sort. So walking around with a sword, as long as you're not brandishing it, was not a problem. However, the Sunnyvale Police Department showed up in force because, guess what? And I asked the police this. I said, how come like 8 people showed up for a dude with a sword and then there was no crime? He wasn't detained, or, I mean, they talked to him, but he went about his business and went on his way. The reason was pretty straightforward. It's training, because there's a general calm around Sunnyvale. It's pretty boring when you get down to it. So every incident or potential incident was a training opportunity, which means all new police officers and anyone on patrol and so on, they would converge not only for, backup, but as a training opportunity. So believe it or not, there was a lot of learning happening, because otherwise it was a pretty boring locality. I will also point out that Sunnyvale at the time, I don't know if this is still true, but at the time Sunnyvale was the keeper of the canines. So in a sort of a cooperative arrangement with Santa Clara, Mountain View, nearby cities, Sunnyvale kept the dogs. They had 2 drug sniffing dogs, as you could call them, and then 2 that were more explosives detection. They could sniff out a bomb. So 4 dogs, and they basically were the keepers of the dogs. There was also a Bearcat patrol vehicle. So there were canine units and this sort of Sunnyvale SWAT. And believe it or not, Sunnyvale not only boring enough to have all police officers show up for a dude with a sword, but also SWAT individuals for the very rare occasion when that was needed. I guess when you have extra money. And that's arguably one of the things that doesn't work so well, is that funding will often go towards, unrestrained purchases like military equipment, it could be a bit much, depends. So Sunnyvale, not the place where you would imagine a lot of SWAT activity, but now and then. Now, actually, what would happen in that cooperative arrangement, sometimes the SWAT unit would have to participate in interjurisdictional activities, maybe San Jose Airport, maybe somewhere in the San Jose, Santa Clara buffer zones around where Sunnyvale is, right? Surrounding areas. Who knows? They don't let me know how everything works down to that detail. So what do we do about this stuff? And again, this is only the beginning. Obviously, we will not make everything work for everybody today, especially because we is me. But I would begin with this simple argument that fighting fire and enforcing the law are 2 completely different pursuits. And so in all but one locality in this United States, these are assigned to different organizations with different training, different equipment, different organizational structure, probably adversarial, which is often the reason given why don't more cities convert to the unified DPS infrastructure? And it's just a political and historical cultural difference that makes that difficult. If police were also fighting fires, training and equipment would be a part of the assignment. It can be done, as Sunnyvale has shown, for decades, but you really have to start out that way. If individual and community health and well-being are made specific focal areas, or one focal area in general, a decision can and should be made whether law enforcement is always the best approach. Having those tasked with that take on a different class of pursuits. In other words, if my goal is to pursue perpetrators of crime, then working with people in more of a social crisis where there's no violence, there's no actual crimes being committed, it's more of a social services area. Maybe the police should not be the first response to those. Maybe. I mean, that's one argument. With specific training, maybe you are more likely a focused organization with properly trained and equipped members. So if police are trained in mitigation, and you'll probably hear that word frequently, mitigation over escalation. But that's not always the case, and there are so many sad stories where things go wrong, almost certainly not helped by who shows up first. The fact that the people with the firearms showed up for my wellness call that I placed, this was probably 2 years ago, maybe more. We'll call it 2 years ago. Things could have gone very wrong for not the best of reasons. So they didn't, but sending maybe an EMT or somebody with counseling or social services in general, training and background may have been better. Who knows? It's hard to say. But we don't always have these options. So police are sort of the catch-all, which is one of the arguments in favor of defunding the police, as they are so often funded, and spreading that money into other services. You call the fire for a fire department for a fire, and then you call the police for anything else, and that's not always appropriate. Transparent reporting. So these, what can we do here? Transparent reporting, clear messaging, and independent interpretation and analysis of public safety data to provide an agenda-free view of overall community health is essential, perhaps even possible. That would be nice, wouldn't it? One classic reporting issue, for example, is using arrest data as crime data or community safety data. This can be addressed with policy consistency and public education. So in other words, if you only report how many people are arrested in a particular locality, that is not an indication of crime. That is an indication of activity, police activity. Not everyone who is arrested has committed a crime, but if they are conflated, then you can automatically assume that more arrests means a less safe area, one more where a crime is more prevalent. So clear interpretation and presentation of data with independent analysis without an agenda, it's possible. And people have to know what they're looking at and what they're hearing about. And if you do read the propaganda book, there are a lot of instances of this where the agenda and the presentation of data are one and the same. And so it's arguable, but it's probably generally true that, anybody who's telling a story probably has something to say. That's true of documentaries and so. So it's, humans are biased creatures. We can't really get around that. So it's what we do about it that matters. And what is the data? What information does it provide? And what information is it hiding are essential. And so knowing that this is the case is a good start. Making the public aware and familiar with this in general would be also a good start. Community engagement is key in both directions. This was something that I saw in Sunnyvale myself. This would ideally close the us-them gap at least a little bit. The Sunnyvale story is an interesting example here where even DPS officers who do not live in the area are engaging with the area, with the neighborhood, with the neighbors outside of incident calls. Making connections in this context is important based on that specific example, but there are more examples, and probably in the general case. The same goes in the other direction. We're working with public safety officials, whether police or fire or other, can transform familiarity and engagement into collaboration and even elevation of the communities involved and the people and organizations in place to keep them safe and healthy. But unfortunately, as we can see in the news of late, safe and healthy are not always on the agenda for some law enforcement agencies. We can put law enforcement in quotes also. Fear and compliance. It's a questionable state of affairs in this modern day, and that's putting it lightly. I think more community awareness. Obviously, local government plays a role, but is it always going to be defending against federally managed forces, the ICE and the Border Patrol and the possibly military interactions? These go beyond local policing, whether it's supplemental or adversarial. That remains to be seen as things seem to be escalating. Let us hope there is no Insurrection Act invocation. Interesting times these. But the take home, this is certainly an area that is not getting solved overnight. Various, headline news stories of incidents that have been rather egregious are fairly common. And we didn't even touch on school shootings. What happens, in the Sunnyvale example, they have an officer that's familiar with the school. So knowing the school, knowing what their level of preparedness is, what their resources are, physical, mechanical resources for lockdown and so on, this might be a part of that engagement that makes managing an incident, the incident response, maybe a little bit more effective if everybody knows what to expect. And that's what I found personally, because I had gone through the SNAP training, the Sunnyvale Neighbors Actively Prepared. When there was a fire, when I was awoken thanks to neighbors banging on windows, I had literally just drifted off to sleep. I fell asleep on the couch. So I wasn't even, off to bed. I literally just dozed off for minutes, maybe. My phone fell out of my hand because, what else do you do but check your phone at 2 a.m? And I was fully clothed because I had only gotten home like an hour before. The take home is that being aware of what is supposed to happen versus what is actually happening, hopefully they're similar. But knowing these things and being familiar up front is helpful. It is useful to know what to expect and who is going to do what. And if you can even see a familiar face in the crowd of police officers and firefighters taking on an incident, so much the better. So I think there's a lot that can be done in this area, obviously. So planting some seeds in this episode, and maybe there will be ongoing discussions about this and so many other topics that have been a part of the FFS Talk audio programming catalog, which is now 100 episodes deep. Thank you so much for listening. Do visit the links in today's episode to keep up with all my various audio programming and consider being a guest someday. That would be fun, wouldn't it? There are not only this program, there are other possibilities. So thanks for listening as always, and take it easy until next week. Stay safe out there.